Hi guys, so a few hours before Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's former advisor, spoke to a parliamentary committee, the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps was interviewed on Sky News, and he dodged a question about something that Boris Johnson allegedly said last year, which is absolutely shocking. Let's hear the interview.
To you, look, I mean, how worried are you about what Dominic Cummings might say?
Well, I think he's probably tweeted most of what he's going to say already.
No, he probably hasn't. I think he has some juicy stuff that he's going to deliver at this select committee. But to take a step back here, I don't think anything that Boris Johnson's former advisor is going to say is really actually going to damage Boris Johnson. Because Boris Johnson has said some pretty horrible things, such as let the bodies pile high. And it hasn't affected him politically. His support has not dropped. Now, the reason being is that he's been protected by the rollout of the vaccine. And the Tories, whenever there's, something difficult, some difficult question to answer, they resort to that. Look at the vaccine rollout. Look how well we're doing. Ignore the problems. Focus on the vaccine. Because they know that this is the only thing that they can cling to. This is supporting Boris Johnson. It's holding him up at the moment. He's going to face some serious problems when that ends. Because, if we look back at last year, support for the Labour Party was increasing during the lockdowns. Boris Johnson was becoming extremely unpopular. When the vaccine rollout began, his popularity increased. Now, of course, this is the hard work of the NHS. It's not the hard work of Boris Johnson. But the public don't see it that way. The public see it as Boris Johnson is saving lives, even though we had 130,000 deaths. Don't focus on that. Focus on the vaccine rollout.
And meanwhile, we're getting on with the job. As we can see, we've got vaccinations now running it. And I'm just looking at on your own ticker here. Over 44% of adults have had both vaccinations. Over 70, well over 70 have had one vaccination. And we're getting on top of this thing. And I think that's only happened because of decisions that were made more than a year ago, right at the beginning of this pandemic, where the Prime Minister put the money into research and development, building manufacturing capacity, and ensuring that we had this sort of world-beating rollout of the vaccine that we're all experiencing and benefiting from now as a population.
Yeah, but everyone would accept that mistakes were made. I mean, in the wake of just the scale of what this turned out to be. I mean, that's going to come as no surprise to anyone. But the Mail's saying this morning the Prime Minister offered to be injected with COVID on live TV to show it was nothing to be scared of.
What? So Boris Johnson, according to the Daily Mail, offered to be injected with COVID on live TV. Now, is this true? I don't know. Is it something that Boris Johnson would likely say? You bet your bottom dollar he would say something like that. Now, well, we've heard him say ridiculous statements before. He said about taking it on the chin. Yeah, this pandemic, you just need to take it on the chin. He said that in front of, I think it was Philip Schofield. This is not something that Boris Johnson would not say. So, did he say it? We don't know, but was he willing to get injected with COVID? Probably not willing to get injected with COVID. It probably would have been just another one of his political stunts, publicity stunts, sorry. It was probably injected with nothing. But it's just to show the public that everything was okay. So at the beginning of the pandemic, the government were afraid of the public panicking. We saw it with the people buying tons of toilet paper and stockpiling on food. There was a real concern that things could get out of hand. And there was an attempt by the government to dampen down the panic. Remember Boris Johnson saying you just need to take it on the chin? This was, in a way, this was twofold. One was to avoid the panic, but another was to avoid the government actually having to do any hard work. They thought that, look, let's just let it run through the population, then we don't actually have to do anything, and we can just continue our lives as normal. That was, I think, a true feeling within the government. Now, of course, Boris Johnson ignored scientific advice regarding that.
Is there any truth in that?
Look, I think you're right the first time, which is that, we were making decisions under unprecedented situation. There's no rule book. There's no sort of textbook to sort of open and see how to deal with a pandemic. The last time the world faced anything like this was 100 years ago with the Spanish flu. And so it's easy to be sort of professors of hindsight.
He's not a professor of hindsight. You made bad decisions. Isn't it interesting he dodged the question about the Boris Johnson getting injected? Anyway, you made mistakes, but these were deliberate mistakes. It's not like you were confused and you didn't know whether to lock down or not. You had scientific advisors. Now, there are a number of things that went terribly, badly wrong. Boris Johnson did not attend COBRA meetings. There were a number, I think it was something like 4 or 5 COBRA meetings. Boris Johnson decided not to go to them. He wanted to write a book instead. He wanted to do other things. He didn't attend these meetings. These were critical meetings. He did not attend them. That was not an error. That was deliberate. Then when it came to lockdowns, Boris Johnson ignored the advice. He waited and waited and waited until it was too late, and then under immense pressure from the scientific community and other politicians, even some within his party, said we need to go into a lockdown. So the lockdown began. Then he came out of lockdown too early. Then had to go into another lockdown. Then there was the circuit breakers, which were advised by SAGE and Independent SAGE, and that was ignored as well. Then there was the fiasco at Christmas. At every stage, Boris Johnson's government were advised to do X, and they ignored it. They waited and waited and waited until it was too late, until it was at a stage where it was completely out of control, and then they would follow the advice. And they did it on numerous occasions. It wasn't just that they did it once and then it was an error. No, they did it on numerous occasions. They ignored the scientific advice about mask wearing as well. There's a list the length of your arm of where SAGE, the scientific experts, were telling the government you need to do X, and they would do Y, or they would do X but at a very late stage.
What I'd say is I think on the very big calls, which are things like developing the vaccine and having a program in place to roll it out faster than any other major equivalent economy, and being able to test now our entire population twice a week. Everybody's entitled to lateral flow tests, being able to sequence the genome, so the science behind it. I think on those big things we got it right. But you're right the first time. There was no rule book, and of course there would be mistakes made. But I think it's easy to sort of be the professor of hindsight.
Once again, the professor of hindsight. Is this a jab at Keir Starmer? Anyway, this is not about hindsight. You made decisions that affected people's lives. You made decisions that resulted in 130,000 deaths. Now, if we look at other countries around the world that actually did listen to scientists, did close their borders at the very beginning, did limit the numbers of people coming into the country, did carry out testing, rigorous testing at the very beginning, did impose mask wearing, did impose a number of restrictions. These countries were able to deal with the pandemic much better. They were able to have shorter periods of restrictions. They were able to come out earlier, and they had fewer deaths. So you can't just turn around and say, well, we did whatever, there wasn't a rule book. We lived, in a vacuum. We couldn't look at other countries, what they were doing. We wanted to do it on our own. And look at the result. Well, ignore the deaths, but focus on the vaccine. So what's Dominic Cummings going to say in his hearing, I don't know yet. But unfortunately, anything he does say is going to have pretty much zero impact on Boris Johnson politically at the moment. It could be used later on in an inquiry, but anything said against Boris Johnson today, I think really won't have an impact on him politically. Now, he's been protected once again by the rollout of the vaccine. When that ends, then we're going to see some perhaps some support for Boris Johnson beginning to nosedive. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?